Welcome back to As the Key Turns. This is the second part of this video. So if you'd like to watch the first part, I would recommend that first, otherwise the second part doesn't make a lot of sense. Donna Allsworth came out to speak to us. Detective Nix read her rights. She said she understood them and agreed to talk to us. She said the night before her husband had left their bed to use the bathroom. He returned in a state of excitement. He said Sally was having a baby in the bathroom. She looked at the clock and it was 7 a.m. on Friday the 21st of December 1979. She got dressed and went downstairs. Sure enough, Sally was lying on the bathroom floor with a bloody crotch, and lying next to her was a large, full trash bag. She told Donna that she'd had a miscarriage, but that she put the bloody jeans and her other bloody clothes in the bag along with the small fetus. She asked Donna to help her. So, Donna helped Sally wipe up all the blood from the room that was part of the laundry area and bathroom. Sally cleaned herself as much as she could, but continued to bleed profusely. Donna told Sally that she should go to the emergency room, but Sally said everything would be okay, and there was no need. Donna left the room and gave the bag to her husband, Warren, and told him to burn it so the dogs and cats wouldn't get into it. Dogs and cats eating a human fetus probably ain't the kind of thing you want to see over bacon and eggs the next morning. Detective Nix wanted to know where her husband Warren was. Donna told him he had gone to see a friend, Cordelia Titus, and would be back shortly. While we waited for Warren, Detective Nix got Donna to sign a consent to search the property. Then he and Deputy Morgan started looking around. Morgan asked Donna where the baby was, and she said that her husband had removed the baby from the barrel with a guy who was staying the night, Ron Mason. The burn barrel was about 60 feet behind the house and had some wet garbage in it, but no baby. Then Warren arrived in his pickup. He got out, approached me. I told him that the deputies had some questions for him. Nix read Warren his rights. Warren was very nervous and his hands were shaking. He said he was on parole. When Nix asked where the baby was, he took them directly to the carport. There was a makeshift shelf, and on it was an old tire. In the tire was a large torn up green trash bag. Visible through some of the rips in the bag was a bloody, partly burned, full-term baby. A cut throat was visible through the rips in the trash bag. It smelled like burned garbage and steak. At least that's what I thought. I couldn't attend an outdoor barbecue after this for about 10 years. It was the smell. Morgan asked Warren where he'd been. He said he had gone to see Mrs. Titus and asked her advice on what to do. She told him to contact his parole officer and the sheriff. He didn't call from the village of Tootle, but was going to make the calls when he came home to find Nix and Morgan waiting for him. He would have called from home, but owing to the fact that they had just moved into the house, they'd not had time to get a phone hooked up yet. This was in the days before cell phones. Nix read Warren his rights and asked him what had happened. Warren said that his wife had left the bathroom with a trash bag that Sally told her was full of bloody clothes and a small fetus. She put the bag on the floor. Warren picked up the bag and took it to the burn barrel they have on the banks of the Tootle River. He went back to the house and got a bunch of trash and cardboard boxes to, quote, start a nice fire, to burn everything. He thought the bag seemed kind of heavy, but with all the blood, he thought that it must have been, what made the bag all heavy was all that blood and stuff. He later said he would always regret not looking into that bag before he threw it into the fire. After that, he went to the house and filled the water tanks with the pump. Now, in some rural areas of Washington, people are not hooked up to any water system. They have to fill a water tank that gravity feeds into their house. Warren got his water from a well on the property, and the sewer was a septic tank that leached water into the soil out back of the house and eventually drained into the Tootle River along with the rest of the groundwater. He was just finishing up his morning chores and starting a fire in the wood stove to heat the house and make coffee. He put the plug back into the water pump when his wife Donna told him that he should sit with Sally while she called their friend Mrs. Ross. Mrs. Ross was a medic and ambulance driver with the Tootle Ambulance Service. Donna wanted to ask Mrs. Ross advice on Sally's condition. Sally was bleeding a lot, and it really concerned Donna. While Warren was talking with Sally and waiting for his wife to return, he asked her, "Why didn't you just tell us you were pregnant?" Sally was so fat nobody could tell if she was pregnant or not. After Donna returned to the house from the neighbors, Warren went out to the hardtop road to show Mrs. Ross where the house was. It was tucked so far back into the woods and the drive was so small it was easy to miss. After a short wait in the cool, misty morning, Mrs. Ross arrived and Warren walked ahead of her car down the long, twisting driveway to the house. He stayed in the kitchen and tended the fire in a wood stove, or went outside to stay out of the way while the women took care of Sally. That evening, Warren and Donna went to see Sally in the hospital. What she told them shocked Warren to his core. Sally told him that the baby was not a fetus and was more than 7 months along. Warren called his friend Ron Mason and asked him to come over and have a look with him at what was in the burn barrel. When all of them got back to the house, it was dark and nobody had a flashlight. Ron decided to stay overnight and see what was in the barrel in the morning when it got light. At 7:30 that morning, Warren woke up, he built a fire and made coffee. Both he and Ron sat in the kitchen drinking coffee and talking until about 9 a.m. Then they both went to the burn barrel. It was behind the house on the banks of the Toutle River. Warren used a stick he found on the ground to root around in the ashes inside the barrel. What he and Ron saw was the most frightening thing that either of them had ever seen or ever would see. It was a small hand, sticking straight up. Warren said it looked like the movie Carrie. He said both men felt sick and were terrified at the same time. They didn't know what to do. Ron wanted no part of dead bodies and left. Warren fished the dead little girl out of the barrel and peeled some of the melted plastic bag off her face. He noticed the gashes and cuts on her neck. Warren felt sick and really confused. He was panicked and had no idea what to do next. Then he decided to ask advice, so he got in his old beat-up pickup truck and drove to Toutle to check his mail and post office and talk to a friend. In the small town of Toutle, Warren spoke to Corky Mason in her home. She told him to call the sheriff and his parole officer. Warren decided to pick up the body and take it to the Hall of Justice in Kelso and turn it over to the sheriff. Then call his parole officer from there. When he came home, he met me in the driveway, standing next to a patrol car. Deputy Morgan got a cardboard box from his trunk. He went to the carport and waited while Nix photographed the scene and the body with a small still camera. Nix held the box while Morgan put the bag containing the body in it. He folded up the box and walked back to the car. I asked him what he had, and he told me that it was a dead baby and he'd rather not view it. The top of the box was closed and all I saw was the box. He put it in the trunk and we went back to the Hall of Justice about 20 minutes away. On the way back, Morgan told me that he was going to have to turn the body over to Dr. Weinbrenner, the county coroner. Dr. Weinbrenner was given a badge number 13 by somebody who must have thought it was either appropriate or funny. On the way back, Morgan called control on the radio and asked him the location of car 13. We were given an address and we met him there at 2:10 p.m. Dr. Weinbrenner told Morgan he'd have to accompany him to Portland for the autopsy. I was dropped off at the hall and Morgan told me to meet him in the next morning and we would continue the work on the case. I had no interest in seeing another autopsy. Last time I'd gotten sick and I didn't want to repeat that incident. At about 6:45 that night, Dr. L. of the Multnomah County Coroner's Office in Portland, Oregon started the autopsy. Morgan said that it reminded him of the TV show Quincy M.E. The doctor said that unlike the TV, both he and Dr. Weinbrenner should ask him what they wanted to know. He could try to answer the questions, but he had to know what they wanted to find out. Morgan asked him if the child had been born alive. The pathologist said the baby had. He could tell he had lived for some time, she had lived for some time because the lungs had breathed air, the heart had been beating because of the amount of blood that was in the chest and the abdomen. Morgan said that since the baby had been born alive, what had killed her? And the doctor said that it was stab wounds with a sharp object in the abdomen and chest. Morgan asked about the cut throat, and he was told it wasn't deep enough to be fatal. They missed the jugular vein. It caused pain and bleeding, but it was not even close to a fatal injury. Surprising to all present was the milk-like substance in the stomach. It looked like the baby had been fed 2 cc's of some liquid before she was murdered. Since the mother was the only person to see her alive, it seemed that she cared for the baby a short time before using a serrated knife to slash and stab her to death on the dirty bathroom carpet. After measuring and weighing the child, the doctor said it was a full or nearly full-term baby and could have lived if it hadn't been murdered. The next morning I met with Nix and Morgan at the hall. I mostly stayed quiet while they planned their investigation. Somebody would have to talk to Sally, collect the part of the umbilical cord the hospital had in locker number 7, talk to all the witnesses and get written statements. We would even have to talk to Sally's parents before we were finished. It was decided to spend the day talking to all the witnesses and getting statements before talking to Sally that evening. Reserve Deputy Wayne George was riding with Nix that day. We went to Sally's parents' house in Longview. Leela is Sally's adopted mother. She told Sally's life story. At 2 years old, her parents died. Her biological parents were members of the Snohomish tribe. Sally bounced around the foster program till she was 6 when Leela and Frank adopted her. Frank had a good job being an electrician at Weyerhaeuser. She lived in the same house on 18th Avenue, Longview, till she graduated from R.A. Long High School in 1971, which was the same high school that I graduated from a few years later. At 20, she had an abortion. In 1976, she gave birth to a little girl. Leela told me that Sally said she would never give birth again. She had left the baby girl with the sitters and she just never came back for her. And the state took the child away from her. Later, Sally had what Sally said was a miscarriage, but nobody but Sally saw that fetus. She almost bled to death before her mom took her to the hospital. She stayed in the hospital for about 10 days that time. At this point, I have wondered, about 40 years now, Sally had an abortion, then she had a baby that was abandoned, then she claimed she had a miscarriage, but only she saw the fetus. Finally, she told the same story again. But this time, it turns out that she murdered her baby. I can't prove it, but it seems likely to me, and a couple of the deputies too, that somewhere in Cowlitz County, there's a little grave with another baby in it. Now, Sally is a stoic person. I know it's a stereotype, the stoic Indian woman. But in Sally's case, it's true. She keeps her cards close to her vest. She even said to Deputy Nix that she didn't want anybody to know that she killed her child when she confessed to the murder. Her own mother said she was distant and quiet as a child, and as an adult, she only came during Christmas to ask for things. They had not seen or heard from Sally in almost a year before the murder. Her father said that she left with barely a goodbye after she graduated high school. He said she couldn't keep her room picked up and follow the rules of the house, so, you had to go. Leela went on to tell us that Sally lived with a man for 2 years. When she had the baby, she refused to marry him and went on welfare. She never had a job. She had no skills. She lived by sponging off men or living off friends' handouts. Now and then her father paid for her abortions or her medical care. We interviewed other people who knew Sally. She had a drinking problem and used marijuana. It seemed that her way to solve problems was to ignore them and hope they got better by themselves. All this information helped prepare Deputy Detective Nix for his interrogation of Sally later that day. It is best if the detective knew all he could about the suspect and the evidence of the crime before he spoke with her. It wasn't vital to the investigation that he got a confession, but it sure would have been nice icing on the cake. Morgan and I returned to the hall. That's the Hall of Justice, by the way. I just called it the hall. In the early afternoon, having spent the day interviewing people and collecting written statements. We met with Nix and gave him the statements we had obtained. I told Nix that Sally's mother, what she told me, what she said. And Sally had even cried once when it rained one day. When her mother asked her what was wrong, she told her that she felt sorry for the birds because they were getting wet. After this meeting, I gave Morgan a few cassette tapes he could use to record any interrogation he had with Sally. He returned all of them later. I went home the rest of the day since I didn't want to sit around the hospital with the 2 deputies doing their job. After I went home, Morgan and Nix went to the hospital and Sally moved to room 309. Morgan told the hospital staff that should Sally attempt to leave, they should call the sheriff's office since she was a suspect in a serious crime. In room 309, Nix told Sally that he wanted to talk about what had happened to her baby. She said it was none of his business. He told her that the baby was born alive, it had been stabbed to death, and she was the only person who saw the baby alive. The couple she was living with were in trouble for helping her dispose of the body. Nix said he had the knife she used to kill her daughter. Sally was silent for some time and didn't respond to any questions. Finally, she said, "What am I to do?" He said, "Tell the truth." Sally told about how the baby, she had the baby on the floor of the bathroom. She just left it on the floor between her legs. She cut the umbilical cord with a 3-inch serrated blade knife she took into the bath with her for that purpose. After that, she thought about how she had no finances to take care of a baby. She had her other baby taken from her. She demonstrated how she held the baby over her head and shook it in a very violent manner. She claims to have no memory of cutting or stabbing the baby, but admits that nobody else could have done it. Nix tried to get Sally to repeat her confession on a tape recorder, but she refused. The whole interview took about an hour. Sergeant Swanson sat in a chair outside of her room all night to make sure she didn't leave. The day after Christmas 1979, Sally was arrested by Deputy Ron West of the Cowlitz County Sheriff's Office for murder. She was booked, mugshots taken, fingerprinted. When she saw Detective Nix later the same day, she said, quote, "You really fixed my Christmas, haven't you, Bob?" unquote. She seemed to have one big concern, and it was that Nix had told others what she had done. She wanted to keep it secret that she killed her daughter. Nix told her that was an impossible wish. Sally pled guilty to second-degree murder of her newborn daughter in Cowlitz County Superior Court. She received a sentence of 20 years. Most people think this is the end of the story. As a correctional officer, I can tell you that this is just the beginning. This case is no exception. Next time, I'll tell you what happened to Sally after her conviction. Now, if you enjoyed this video, by all means, please go to patreon.com/asthekeyturns and you can, for as little as $1, be a member. And I would appreciate it, and it would make you a beautiful person. Thanks for watching.